Monday, January 26, 2026, a date that will be remembered in Canadian weather history. While families across Ontario woke up to what seemed like another winter morning, meteorologists were watching their screens in disbelief. The numbers coming in were staggering, unprecedented, historic. By the time the snow stopped falling, Toronto Pearson Airport had recorded 46 centimeters of snow in a single day, shattering every record in the books. This wasn't just another snowstorm. This was a generational event, a perfect meteorological storm that would bury southern Ontario under a blanket of white so thick it would rewrite the record books and bring an entire province to a standstill. This is the story of how a massive American winter storm collided with Arctic air over the Great Lakes, creating what Environment Canada would call one of the most significant winter weather events in modern Ontario history. To understand what happened last weekend, we need to rewind the clock. The stage for this historic snowstorm was set days before the first flake fell. South of the border, a monster was brewing. A massive low-pressure system was organizing across the central United States, threatening over 160 million Americans with what forecasters were calling a destructive combination of heavy snow and ice. From Oklahoma City to New York, from the Gulf Coast to Boston, emergency declarations were being issued. This wasn't just another winter storm, it was a continental-scale weather event. But while Americans braced for impact, Canadians had their own problem developing. A polar vortex, that Arctic beast we've all heard about, had punched through the jet stream and was settling over eastern Canada like an unwelcome guest. Temperatures across Ontario had plunged to levels not seen in a decade. Friday night, areas south and west of Toronto saw the mercury drop into the -20s. North and northeast of the city, we're talking -30s, with some locations flirting with -40 degrees Celsius. Think about that for a moment. -40. That's the temperature where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet, where exposed skin can develop frostbite in minutes, where your breath crystallizes instantly in the air. Now, here's where the meteorology gets fascinating and terrifying. You had this massive, moisture-laden low-pressure system pushing northward from the United States. It was carrying with it subtropical moisture, warm air from the Gulf of Mexico that had been drawn into the circulation. Normally, when warm, moist air meets cold air, you get precipitation. That's basic meteorology 101. But this wasn't a normal setup. The Arctic air mass sitting over Ontario was so cold, so entrenched, that it wasn't budging. And when that warm, moisture-rich air from the south tried to override the cold air, it created what meteorologists call a classic overrunning pattern. The warm air was forced to rise over the cold air mass, and as it rose, all that moisture condensed and fell as snow. But wait, there's more. The Great Lakes, specifically Lake Ontario, were about to add their own twist to this story. Lake Ontario, despite the frigid air temperatures, was still relatively warm, hovering around 2 to 4 degrees Celsius. Not warm by summer standards, obviously, but much warmer than the -20-degree air above it. This temperature contrast created what's known as lake enhancement. As the wind blew across the lake from the east and northeast, it picked up additional moisture, which then fell as even heavier snow on the downwind shores. The Golden Horseshoe, that densely populated arc stretching from Niagara Falls through Toronto to Oshawa, was positioned perfectly to receive this lake-enhanced snowfall. It was meteorological geometry working against us. By Thursday, January 23rd, meteorologists at Environment Canada and the Weather Network were huddling over their computer models, running simulation after simulation. The models were starting to agree, which in weather forecasting is both reassuring and concerning. Reassuring because it gives you confidence in the forecast. Concerning because what they were all showing was significant. By Friday, the forecast became clearer and more ominous. Snowfall warnings began to be issued. The language was stark. Disruptive snow, near whiteout conditions, travel not advised. Accumulations of 20 to 30 centimeters were forecast for the greater Toronto area, with the possibility of more in lake-enhanced areas. Jeff Coulson, a warning preparedness meteorologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada, would later explain what made this storm different: the cold. Often, especially in southern Ontario, there will be a thaw a few days after a massive snowfall, he said, but that's not going to be the case this time. The snow that was coming wasn't just going to fall, it was going to stay. Saturday evening, January 25th. The anticipation was building. Grocery stores across southern Ontario saw a familiar pre-storm rush. Bread, milk, batteries, candles, the usual suspects flew off the shelves. Smart residents made sure their phones were charged, their pantries stocked, their snow shovels easily accessible. As darkness fell, the first flakes began to appear, light at first, almost delicate, but meteorologists watching their radar screens knew what was coming. The main band of heavy snow was still hours away, gathering strength as it pushed northward through Michigan and Ohio. Overnight, lake-effect snow squalls began to develop off Lake Ontario. These intense, localized bands of snow gave some areas a preview of what was to come. Sudden whiteouts, rapid accumulation, wind-whipped snow that seemed to come from every direction at once. Sunday morning dawned gray and ominous. The snow that had been light and scattered overnight began to intensify. By 9 a.m., it was falling steadily across most of southern Ontario. By 10 a.m., visibility was dropping rapidly. By noon, the storm was in full force. The Weather Network's forecast had called for the heaviest snow to hit the Greater Toronto area in the afternoon and evening hours. They were right on the money. Picture this scene playing out across millions of square kilometers, snow falling at rates of 3 to 5 centimeters per hour. That's heavy. That's the kind of snowfall rate where plows, even working at full capacity, struggle to keep up. Where the road you cleared 10 minutes ago is already covered again. Where the line between the road and the sidewalk disappears under a uniform blanket of white. The temperature hovered between -10 and -15 degrees Celsius. Cold enough that the snow was that perfect, fluffy powder that skiers dream about. Light, dry snow that compresses down to nothing when you try to make a snowball. Snow that drifts easily with even a moderate wind. And speaking of wind, gusts were hitting 50 to 60 kilometers per hour across much of the region, with reports of 70 km/h along the Lake Ontario shoreline. This wasn't just snow falling straight down. This was snow being driven horizontally, creating ground blizzards even in areas where it had stopped snowing. Visibility in open areas and near the lake was measured in meters, not kilometers. As predicted, Lake Ontario was proving to be a snow multiplier. The easterly wind flow off the lake was creating a semi-stationary band of enhanced snowfall. This band, perhaps 30 to 50 kilometers wide, was sitting over portions of the GTA and not moving. If you were in this band, you weren't getting 20 centimeters. You weren't getting 30 centimeters. You were on track for 40, 50, even 60 centimeters of snow. The exact position of this band remained somewhat uncertain throughout the day. It shifted slightly north and south based on subtle changes in wind direction. But its impact was undeniable. Some neighborhoods were measuring snowfall depths that were dramatically higher than areas just a few kilometers away. As evening approached, the storm reached its crescendo. This was the period, roughly 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., when the heaviest snow was falling. Imagine being outside during this time. The wind is howling, driving snow into your face with such force that you have to turn away. Visibility is reduced to less than a car length. Streetlights create halos in the swirling white. The sound of the wind drowns out everything else. No cars, no voices, just the relentless roar of the storm. The snow is accumulating so fast you can literally watch it happen. That porch you cleared an hour ago? Buried again? Those steps you shoveled? You can't even tell where they are anymore. Emergency services across the region were reporting treacherous conditions. Highway 401, Canada's busiest highway, was seeing multiple accidents and slowdowns. The QEW was gridlocked in sections. Secondary roads were becoming impassable. Police services across the GTA were issuing urgent pleas. Stay home. Don't travel unless absolutely necessary. And if you must travel, prepare as if you might get stranded. Tow trucks were backed up with calls. Some were reporting wait times of 4, 5, even 6 hours. Drivers who had gotten stuck in snowdrifts or slid off the road were settling in for a long wait. As midnight approached and Monday began, the snow in western areas of southern Ontario was finally beginning to taper off. But eastern Ontario wasn't so lucky. Ottawa, Kingston, and surrounding areas would continue to see heavy snow well into Monday morning. The snowfall finally began to wind down across the GTA around 2 to 3 a.m. Monday morning. But the damage, if you can call 50 plus centimeters of beautiful but inconvenient snow damage, was done. When the sun rose Monday morning, though you couldn't really see it through the overcast skies, Ontario woke up to a scene that looked more like something from a disaster movie than real life. The numbers were staggering. Toronto Pearson International Airport, which has been keeping detailed weather records since 1937, recorded 46 centimeters of snow on Sunday alone. 46 centimeters in one day. It was the highest daily snowfall ever recorded at Canada's busiest airport, breaking records that had stood for nearly 90 years. But that wasn't all. When meteorologists tallied up the total snowfall for January 2026, they came up with a number that made even seasoned weather watchers do a double take: 88.2 centimeters. January 2026 wasn't just the snowiest January on record. It was the snowiest month of any month since records began in 1937. Let that sink in. In nearly 90 years of record keeping, through countless winter storms and blizzards, through the legendary winters of the past, January 2026 now stands alone at the top. Other areas reported even higher totals from the weekend storm. Parts of the lake-enhanced zone saw 50 to 60 centimeters. Some lucky, or unlucky, depending on your perspective, areas exceeded 60 centimeters. Perhaps the most immediate and visible impact was on education. Monday morning brought what might be the most comprehensive snow day in recent Ontario history. Every single school board across the Greater Toronto Area announced closures. That's Toronto, Durham, Peel, York, Halton, all closed. But it didn't stop there. Boards across southern Ontario, from Windsor to Ottawa, announced closures or bus cancellations. The statistics were impressive. Hundreds of thousands of students got an unexpected day off. Parents scrambled to find childcare or work from home. Teachers, many of whom were snowed in themselves, breathed a sigh of relief at not having to brave the roads. But here's the thing about this snow day. It wasn't just about the snow that had fallen. It was about the snow that was still falling in eastern areas. The roads that hadn't been cleared, the temperatures that remained dangerously cold, and the wind that was still creating blowing snow and poor visibility. Road crews had been working 12-hour shifts throughout the night, but they were fighting a losing battle. Residential streets in many areas were still impassable. Main roads were down to one lane in each direction, with snow walls on either side. Highways were snow-covered, and visibility remained poor in many areas due to blowing snow. The cleanup effort was monumental. Picture this. Southern Ontario's major cities deploy hundreds of plows, salt trucks, and front-end loaders. These machines work in a carefully coordinated dance, first clearing major arteries, then secondary roads, then residential streets. But this wasn't a normal cleanup. The sheer volume of snow meant that plowing wasn't enough. The snow had to be hauled away. In Toronto alone, hundreds of truckloads of snow were transported to designated snow dump sites, vacant lots, parking areas, anywhere that could accommodate the White Mountains being created. Property owners faced their own challenges. Where do you put 50 centimeters of snow? Driveways became tunnels. Sidewalks disappeared, front doors were blocked. Some people literally had to dig themselves out of their homes. And remember, this was happening in temperatures that remained well below freezing. Working outside for more than 15-20 minutes meant risking frostbite. Every shovelful of snow felt heavier when your hands were numb and your back was already sore. Toronto Pearson International Airport, which recorded that historic snowfall, saw hundreds of flight cancellations and delays. Runways had to be continuously cleared. De-icing operations were running at full capacity. Passengers were stranded, some sleeping on airport floors, waiting for conditions to improve. Go Transit, the regional transit system serving the Greater Toronto Area, reported significant delays and cancellations. Snow on the tracks, frozen switches, reduced visibility, all combined to create a system-wide slowdown. Highway 401, the busiest highway in North America on a normal day, was a shadow of its usual self Monday morning. Traffic was light because most people had heeded the warnings to stay home, but moving slowly. The lanes were narrower, covered in packed snow. Visibility was reduced by blowing snow. Speed limits were reduced. But amidst the chaos and inconvenience, something beautiful emerged. Community spirit. Neighbors helped neighbors dig out cars, strangers helped push vehicles stuck in snowdrifts, people checked on elderly residents to make sure they had food and heat. Social media was filled with images, kids building massive snow forts, dogs leaping through snow deeper than they were tall, creative snow sculptures taking advantage of the abundant material. The hashtag #OnStorm was trending across Canada. For all the inconvenience, there was also a sense of shared experience. We were all in this together, and there's something about a major snowstorm that brings out the best in people. Now that we've lived through the storm, let's talk about what made it so exceptional from a meteorological standpoint. First, the timing. The collision of that massive U.S. storm system with the entrenched Arctic air mass over Ontario happened at exactly the wrong, or right, depending on your perspective, moment. If the timing had been off by even 12 hours, the storm might have tracked farther south, or the Arctic air might have moderated. Instead, everything aligned perfectly. Second, the moisture content. That low-pressure system had tapped into Gulf moisture, giving it an almost unlimited supply of water vapor to convert into snow. Combined with the lake enhancement from Lake Ontario, you had a snow-producing machine that was firing on all cylinders. Third, the temperature. The extremely cold air meant that the snow-to-liquid ratio was very high. Typically, you might expect a 10-to-1 ratio, 10 centimeters of snow for every centimeter of water. But in this case, the ratio was closer to 15 or even 20-to-1. That fluffy, powdery snow meant that a given amount of moisture produced more snow depth than it would have in warmer conditions. Fourth, the duration. This wasn't a quick-hitting system. It settled in and pounded the region for 18-24 hours in most areas, longer in eastern Ontario. That sustained heavy snowfall is what allowed the accumulations to reach such extreme levels. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, but I thought the climate was warming. How do we get a record snowstorm if the planet is getting warmer? It's a fair question, and the answer is more nuanced than you might think. Climate change doesn't mean winter disappears. It doesn't mean we won't see snow or cold temperatures. What it does mean is that the overall patterns are shifting. Winters are generally becoming milder and shorter in many parts of Canada. But within that trend, you can still have extreme events, including extreme snowfall. In fact, some climate scientists argue that certain types of winter storms might actually become more intense in a warming world, at least for a while. Warmer air can hold more moisture. A slightly warmer Great Lakes region means the lakes stay unfrozen longer, continuing to provide moisture for lake-effect snow events later into the winter. The polar vortex disruptions we've been seeing more frequently in recent years, where Arctic air breaks free and plunges southward, might be linked to changes in the Arctic caused by warming. It's a complex system, and scientists are still working to understand all the connections. What we can say with confidence is this: extreme weather events, whether that's extreme heat, extreme rainfall, or yes, extreme snowfall, are becoming more common. The range of what's normal is expanding, and we're seeing more records broken, both hot and cold, wet and dry. Remember what Jeff Coulson from Environment Canada said? This snow isn't going anywhere anytime soon. The long-range forecast for Ontario shows temperatures remaining well below normal through the end of January and into early February. We're not talking about a quick warm-up and thaw. We're talking about sustained cold with high temperatures, mainly in the minus teens, and overnight lows in the 20s. That 50-plus centimeters of snow that buried southern Ontario, it's going to stay right where it is, slowly compacting and settling, but not melting. Some forecasts are suggesting that truly seasonal temperatures, meaning temperatures near 0°C, might not return until around February 5th. And even then, there's a possibility of another cold snap hitting around mid-February. The models are showing signs of another Arctic outbreak possible in the second week of February. For snow lovers, this is paradise. The snowpack is going to be excellent for winter activities well into February. Ski hills are ecstatic. Snowmobilers have trails that will stay in excellent condition. For those who aren't winter enthusiasts, well, it's going to be a long few weeks. So what do we make of the storm of January 26, 2026? How will history remember this event? It's already clear that this was a generational storm. The records it set, 46 centimeters in a single day at Pearson, 88.2 centimeters total for January, are the kind of records that might stand for decades. Some records stand for a century or more. This was the kind of storm that people will remember and talk about for years. Remember the big storm of 26? It will be a reference point, a benchmark against which future storms are measured. For meteorologists, it was a successful forecast. The warnings were issued days in advance. The predictions for snowfall amounts, while always uncertain in the details, were remarkably accurate in the big picture. People had time to prepare, and by and large, they did. For emergency services and municipal workers, it was a massive challenge met with professionalism and dedication. Those plow drivers working 12-hour shifts through the night, the emergency responders answering calls in treacherous conditions, they're the unsung heroes of this story. For ordinary Ontarians, it was a reminder of the power of nature and the importance of community. It was an inconvenience, certainly, but it was also, for many, a kind of forced pause in our busy lives. A snow day that reminded us that sometimes nature decides the schedule, not us. As we move forward through the winter of 2026, this storm will remain a touchstone. It's taught us lessons about preparation, about respecting weather warnings, about the importance of maintaining infrastructure and emergency services. It's also reminded us of the incredible variability of weather. Just when you think you've seen everything, Mother Nature has a way of surprising you. The snow that blanketed Ontario last weekend was both unprecedented in the record books and part of a long tradition of memorable Canadian winter storms. Will we see another storm like this? Eventually, yes. Whether it's next year or 10 years from now or 50 years from now, records are made to be broken. That's the nature of extreme weather. But for now, as Ontario digs out from under this historic snowfall and braces for the cold weeks ahead, we can appreciate this storm for what it was. A remarkable meteorological event that reminded us of winter's awesome power. Stay warm out there, Ontario. Stay safe. And if you're one of the lucky ones who loves winter, enjoy it. This is the kind of snowpack you don't get every year. Thanks for watching this breakdown of Ontario's historic snowstorm. If you found this useful or interesting, hit that like button. Subscribe for more weather analysis and Canadian content, and drop a comment below. I want to hear your stories from the storm. How much snow did you get? Are you still digging out? Let's hear it. Until next time, stay weather aware and stay safe.